How's it going guys, Kris here with another one of those Battlefield Top 10 lists. And today we're going to be checking out some of my favourite semi-automatic rifles and DMRs to feature in the Battlefield series over the years. Not always the most popular weapon category in the games due to being limited to firing one bullet per trigger pull, but still a category that happens to have some extremely effective guns over most ranges that are even capable of tackling with snipers, along with other players roaming around beyond those closer distances. The semi-automatic weapons might all seem to function in the same kind of way, but they still offer their own unique stats and qualities, making some more useful than others in certain situations. Now, there is no right or wrong answer when it comes to picking what's the best, because at the end of the day it's all just down to personal preference, and every gun in the series has the capacity to do well in the right hands. With that said, there's definitely a few over the years that have stood out a bit more to me, that I've simply enjoyed using a bit more than some of the others, basically being my best choices. So speaking of personal preferences, do feel free to share your opinions down below in the comments and let me know which semi-auto rifles and DMRs you've preferred using over your time playing the Battlefield games. So kicking the list off in 10th place is the SCAR-H SV, aka the SCAR-H sniper variant. You'll all probably be familiar with the SCAR-H as an assault rifle, but this one's made to function in semi-auto with a longer barrel for extra range. We got to use this gun in Battlefield 4 where it had quite a lot of really good qualities, being the most accurate DMR in the game from a stats standpoint. But this is one of its defining properties, having really low and equally balanced left and rightwards recoil figures of just 0.05. And this, combined with it having a slightly higher than average bullet speed, gives the gun a really solid profile when it comes to precision. Probably one of the most important things to consider when picking a DMR, making it a perfect choice for taking on players further away. Exactly what the gun is designed for. The SCAR-H SV's fire rate isn't exactly all that impressive, being one of the 5 DMRs in the game to shoot at the fairly slow speed of 260 RPM, perhaps limiting the gun's aggressive capabilities. But providing you keep a bit more distance between you and your targets, engaging most players over those mid to long ranges, then the SCAR-H SV's got both precision and reliability on its side, having an easy to handle recoil pattern and a healthy magazine size of 21 bullets, with the fastest reload speeds of all the DMRs, an all around great choice to pick. Next up is the Turner SMLE from Battlefield 5's Assault class, essentially one of the better semi-auto rifles in that game for offensive tactics. The gun nicely slots into an aggressive role really well, down to pretty much all of its stats catering to gung-ho playstyles. It takes people down in 3 shots up close, just like most of the other semi-auto rifles, and it's also got a faster fire rate than average, cutting down those kill times in close quarters. And it's this combination of speed and power that often makes the Turner SMLE a really deadly weapon to use against players close by. I guess you could say that it's a very similar kind of gun to the MAZ-44, which on paper actually looks like the better weapon of the two, with the MAZ-44 having slightly less kick and a slightly faster bullet speed, but longer reloads. So why have I gone and picked the Turner SMLE? Well, the MAZ-44 might seem to have the edge from the word go, but the Turner SMLE's more reliable reloads actually allow it to perform better when you're under pressure, within its optimal engagement range. Basically because you're going to be less vulnerable whilst using it here. The MAZ-44's slightly lower recoil and slightly higher bullet speed won't make all that much of a difference against players close by. Plus the Turner SMLE can become an arguably even better weapon after you've played around with its specializations, as although both can use detachable magazines, the Turner SMLE is still going to reload them a lot quicker too. And all of these factors combined with those nippy kill times and swift reload speeds generally makes the Turner SMLE a bit better suited for doing what it's supposed to do. Coming in at number 8 is the SERRAGotti from Battlefield 1, a weapon that a lot of people tend to forget about due to it being one of the medic class's starter guns, but still one of the best well-rounded options in the game nevertheless. Just like the last gun we talked about, the SERRAGotti is one of those weapons that tends to perform a bit better against players that are closer by. Not exactly a fantastic close quarter weapon overall, down to there being so many rapid firing SMGs, LMGs and shotguns knocking about in the game, but still one that can do a lot better than most of the other semi-automatic rifles against targets nearby, out to early mid distances, and even slightly beyond, with it being one of the best options for passive aggressive playstyles. This is, once again, down to it having a fairly decent combo of close range power and speed, as the SERRAGotti is going to take players out faster than average up to about 55 meters, though beyond this its range will start to suffer. But even though it's not designed to be the most effective long distance weapon in the class, it can still perform relatively well whatever the situation, having recoil stats that are easily manageable, providing you slow down your fire a bit, allowing your sights to reset after every shot. Essentially making the SERRAGotti one of the most versatile weapons in Battlefield 1, being a pretty handy rifle to have equipped in most scenarios. In 7th place, we're hopping back into Battlefield 5 with the GOVER 43. Another semi-auto rifle for the assault class with a bit more punch than a lot of its alternatives. This is yet another gun that can be equipped and used pretty much straight away as soon as you get into multiplayer. But despite being another starter weapon, the GOVER 43 boasts a heavy damage output, along with a fairly decent fire rate, giving it some of the most impressive kill times of all the semi-auto rifles. There's a few other guns in this category with similar damage profiles, but most of them shoot slower and sacrifice a bit of that lethality in favour of having better stats in other areas. The GOVER 43 sort of puts most of its eggs in the same basket and prioritises deadliness over most other things, so it would seem. But the thing is, although the GOVER 43 does have the tendency to bounce around quite a bit, the gun can be drastically improved once you apply a few weapon specialisations, lowering its kick, thus putting it more in line with the other semi-auto rifles. It's also one of the only heavy hitters in the game that can adopt detachable magazines, basically letting you speed up reloads and bypass all that messing around with clips and bullets, pretty much countering one of the gun's main annoyances, transforming it into a monster of a rifle that's deadly, simple to use, and often more reliable than some of its counterparts. Coming up next is the QBU-88, which started off being a bit of an average bog standard weapon with a slow fire rate and reload times when we got to use it in Battlefield 3, but then ended up blossoming into one of the best DMRs in the whole series when it returned again in Battlefield 4. It was basically a complete upgrade, now having one of the best balance of stats in the whole category, having a lot of its recoil toned right the way down compared to older versions in other games, along with its rate of fire boosted, making it the second quickest of the bunch. Combine all of this with the fact that it's got the fastest bullet speed of all the DMRs, a factor which is really beneficial for taking on snipers and players running around in the distance, and you've got a rifle that's geared up for taking down people quickly and effectively over all ranges, giving it a lot of versatility. Even its recoil stats are pretty good too, having less vertical kick than most of the others, along with less spread, tighter hipfire, and an even faster recoil recovery rate than average. So in a way, the QBU-88 sort of ticks all the right boxes for being an effective mid to long range semi-automatic rifle. The only real downside is the smaller magazines and slightly longer reloads, but so long as you can take this into account and try to make every shot hit, these things shouldn't really cause too many problems, with all the gun's vast number of advantages largely outweighing a few of its minor flaws. In the middle of the list now is the Autoloading 8, which we've seen in quite a few different variations throughout multiple Battlefield titles. But even though it's featured in Battlefield 1, having both .25 and .35 variants which perform differently, and also pops up again in Battlefield 5 being an SLR for the Recon class, the Autoloading 8's always been a really bloody good gun in pretty much every form, even though it's sort of functioned like different weapons despite being the same thing. It was one of the most aggressive but riskier guns to use in its .35 chambering in Battlefield 1, having loads of damage and a snappy fire rate, with the trade-off of having limited ammo per magazine, where if you were accurate and daring enough, could pretty much wipe the floor with almost anyone in a one-on-one fight. The slightly less risky .25 variant traded some of that power over range for detachable magazines which held more ammo, making the gun more dependable and perhaps a bit better for rushing enemy positions. And when it came back in the next game during Battlefield 5, the Autoloading 8 was, once again, a really aggressive but slightly risky gun to use, having limited ammo but tons of damage and speed, benefiting players who enjoyed using risk-reward type weapons. So the fact that it was such a great gun over the many formats we got to use it in definitely means that it rightfully deserves to be on this list. The M82 has generally been the Battlefield series' OP sniper weapon, particularly in Battlefield 4 where it appeared as a battle pickup, and had the ability to put people down in just one shot at any range, anywhere on the body. And being a semi-automatic rifle that could fire follow-up shots far quicker than a typical bolt action, this gave it an unrivaled amount of firepower compared to most of the other guns in the whole franchise. But when the M82 came back in Battlefield Hardline as a professional class weapon, it did so with a weaker cartridge to help balance it with the other guns. With that said, the M82-416 is still arguably one of the deadliest long-range weapons in that game, still shooting far quicker than the bolt actions, yet dealing more damage than all the other semi-automatic rifles. The fact that it could still kill most of its targets in just 2 body shots out to a pretty decent range gave the gun a hell of a lot of worth compared to the other choices, essentially acting like a middle ground weapon between the bolt action and semi-auto rifles, giving the user the best of both worlds. Of course, it wasn't without its drawbacks, the main ones being lots of recoil, low ammo capacity, and lazy reload times. but so long as you pace shots out rather than spamming the trigger, and use the gun in the same way you'd typically use a long-range sniper rifle, those disadvantages never became a problem, as the M82-416 could always destroy targets one by one really quickly and really easily. The next semi-auto rifle in the list is pretty much the complete opposite to the last one, and that rifle is the SKS, a weapon that a lot of people will probably be familiar with for being one of the Battlefield series' most aggressive DMRs. Now this is a spam fire weapon. Its stats are all basically catered to people who like tapping the trigger to force out lots of shots really quickly, cutting its targets down at impressive rates within short to medium distances, where the gun is generally designed to perform at its best. The SKS is not only the fastest firing semi-auto rifle in the games it's appeared in, over Battlefields 3 and 4, but it's also got some really low vertical recoil stats, meaning it's not going to bolt upwards quite as much after each shot. And it's also got some of the fastest recoil recovery rates too, basically allowing the recoil to reset a little bit quicker than normal after each shot, a stat that favours slamming the trigger quickly without having to worry about the gun sights drifting off into space. To complement its close range effectiveness, the SKS has also got a fairly decent sized magazine of 21 rounds, usually enough to take on a few players before you'll need to reload. It's definitely not going to perform quite as well as some of the other semi-auto rifles over longer distances, due to its lower bullet speed and slightly weaker damage over range. But providing you play to the gun's strengths and know its limits, the SKS can be one of the best DMRs for offensive playstyles, even able to compete quite comfortably with some of the fully automatic weapons in a lot of cases. In second place is Battlefield 5 ZH-29, a pretty infamous gun in that game due to it being just so bloody good. This weapon pops up in the recon class under the self-loaded rifles, and let's just say that it's a complete powerhouse, albeit the slowest firing gun of its kind in the game, but potentially one of the best rounded. If you look over at its general stats, it sorta looks like a slower firing version of the Subslider 1906, making it a really strong 2-hit kill weapon, but still a slightly inferior weapon to that Subslider. But it's only really when you get those specializations involved when you can lock the ZH-29's full potential, with it being the only SLR to feature detachable box magazines, speeding up reloads, making them much more consistent, and even giving you an extra bullet too, countering one of the SLR category's biggest drawbacks. Adding detachable mags now gives you a weapon that's going to be a lot more reliable, and considering most snipers in the game, including all the bolt actions and even the anti-tank rifles, often usually take the same number of shots to kill, this gives the ZH-29 a distinct advantage, having quicker kill times than them all, aside from the other SLRs of course. But the fact that this gun can use detachable mags and can still perform quite well when used aggressively because of its higher damage per bullet, makes it an extremely versatile and effective semi-automatic weapon, easily one of the best in Battlefield's history. So in my number one spot is a weapon that's actually quite similar to the last one, the RSC 1917. Which was also in the same SLR category in Battlefield 5, being a quicker shooting weapon with less range than the ZH-29, generally being a pretty good gun in that game. But the best version of the RSC 1917 rifle was the one we first got to use in Battlefield 1, being a slow shooting beast with tons of kick, but a hell of a lot of power to go with it, being one of the game's most punishing risk-reward type weapons. There was no other gun in Battlefield 1 quite like the RSC rifle, being able to put people down in just 2 bullets right the way out to 70 meters. Pretty much covering the entire close to mid-range span, with it firing at the really generous rate of 180 RPM, far quicker than any bolt-action rifle. Well, this gave the gun not only some really impressive kill times over medium distances, but also up close too, even capable of beating a lot of the fully automatic SMGs and LMGs in a short distance fight. It wasn't exactly the easiest weapon to get to grips with, and its heavy recoil did take a bit of getting used to, not exactly a noob-friendly weapon, especially with it only having a fairly limited ammo capacity of 6 shots. But if you were accurate enough, and could learn to pace your shots out a bit against players further away to help counter some of the rifle's kick, then the RSC 1917 was an absolute beast of a weapon, quite possibly being one of the most effective guns in the whole series. So those are a few of my favourite semi-automatic rifles in the Battlefield games, but do let me know down below in the comments which ones you think are the best, and the ones you've enjoyed using the most over the many Battlefield titles. Thanks for watching guys, hope you enjoyed the video, subscribe for loads more, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.